online media definitely changed how we interact, and the research regarding digital online media had to be very different than our research with offline analog media. And so the research started to look about how this was different in three major components. One was the interactivity. Yes, with analog media, we could yell at a sports game, but with digital media, we could start to post comments or send emails or have a back and forth. It changed our access. It became a lot more portable, especially with the advent of Wi-Fi and smaller devices. You think about carrying around an MP3 player instead of carrying around a giant boombox. And it became editorialized. This is the idea that it could be edited. We started to see airbrushing. We started to see photoshopping. We started to have auto-tune and autocorrect and filtering. And this started to change our perceptions of what was reality. It started to be a bit more perfect looking. Because of this, the research on how we consume and react to digital media had to become a lot more advanced. Now, it's well outside the scope of this course. We could have a whole semester on psychology and the media, and that's not what this course is. But just to give a little bit of flavor, I want to talk about three hot button issues, and that is how digital media has influenced the body image of adolescents, violence amongst adolescents, and the use of pornography in adolescents. So we're going to start off talking about the body image research. This is just a really quick synopsis, and again, this is a much more detailed topic. But it's understood that we've always responded to body image issues in movies and magazines. If we think as far back as Marilyn Monroe, people were dressing and trying to compare themselves to movie stars. Movie stars that had access to makeup artists and to dietitians and to special effects that the average person did not. But with digital media, that became much more competitive, especially with the use of Photoshop. Now, celebrities that appeared on magazine covers were being Photoshopped. Not even their body was perfect enough. Things like showing a thigh gap or larger breasts, even more than what they could obtain through plastic surgery, became very visible. You'd brush out cellulite, brush out blemishes on the face. And so this airbrushing set even higher and more unrealistic expectations for us. We know there's been lots of psych studies out there showing the effects of consuming this type of alter-edited image. We know that people who look at magazines with lots of very beautiful faces that are highly edited tend to rate themselves as feeling more depressed after they read those magazines. We know their self-esteem tends to take a nosedive, and that this ability to constantly socially compare themselves to others has really influenced them. So the ubiquity of magazines that ask people, are you a pear or an apple, or how buff are you, or better ways to get sexy, or more ways to grow muscle, are problematic for our mental well-being. And so this has been marked as a real problem. Now, luckily in the year 2020, we're starting to reply to this and we're starting to advocate against this ultra editing, but it still happens. Another issue we have to talk about, of course, is violence amongst teens that are consuming this media. For years, there was concern about what happened when we passively consumed very violent media. This started even with Sherlock Holmes books. It's the idea that if you're constantly reading Agatha Christie murder mysteries, is that going to make you a more dark thinker? Is that going to make you more obsessed with the dark side of humanity? So crime novels were considered to be an agent of corruption. Then with movies and TV shows that were also very violent, if you think about at the early 2000s, there was so many crime and drama shows that existed, all these different cop shows, all these different homicide investigation shows. How would that influence us? And so these were considered to be agents of corruption. But then it got worse when our media became more interactive and through the use of interactive video games. Violent video games and first-person shooters, things like Grand Theft Auto or war-like stories, have been considered to be a major agent of radicalizing and causing youth to become more violent. But the issue is very controversial. Although some scholars say that it definitely makes people more violent, other studies have found that it doesn't. It's more mixed. So what do we know at this point in time? Well, some of the studies are really murky, but the ones that are clear definitely show us there is an effect of desensitization. What happens is when a person is exposed either passively or interactively with violent media, this makes them start to habituate to the violence. Their brain adapts to it. And because they're experiencing violence, but they are truly safe, they're not actually in a war zone, they're not actually experiencing trauma, their body and their brain starts to filter it out and starts to feel like they could be less reactive to it. they also start to engage in vicarious learning and social modeling. And this is the idea that they start to feel like they pick up some of the idiosyncrasies and some of the common expressions. Especially in preteens and young adolescents, they might pick up turns of phrases or body gestures associated with it. You think about the game Fortnite, which is a very violent game. What made the game very viral was the dance moves. So people were not actually modeling the violence, but they were modeling the dancing associated with it. Now, where there's a big discrepancy is the violent video games may influence us, but they may not influence our actions. They may only influence our attitudes, and not in the way we might think. It might not be that a person feels violence is right or moral, but they might feel that violence is less of a big deal, or that violence is commonplace, or that they might think violence is funny. It might be funny to joke about stealing a car and hurting a person. And so what happens here is it might not actually cause people to become violent, but it might make a person more numb to violence. And so that when violence does happen around them, they're less aware of it and less willing to respond to it. Now, another problem that's happened is through the advent of first-person shooters and violent video games is it might make people have inaccurate interpersonal reflections. That is, if they play a game about them stealing cars, they might actually think in real life they're good at stealing cars. Although I enjoy playing Mario Kart, I am not a good driver and I am definitely not a good racer. But a lot of teens and youth might think that, hey, I did this, I could handle a real gun. I could handle this first-person shooter, now I could handle a real gun. So because they underestimate their actual abilities with these risky behaviors, because they're numb to them, this can actually lead them down the path later to become radicalized. But it's not going to make all of us become more violent. So it is a very controversial area. Now, the last area in digital media I want to talk about is pornography. And so why are adolescents interested in consuming pornography in a digital format? Well, there's lots of theories. One is sexual satiation. They're actually becoming mature, becoming sexually curious, and this seems like a safer or more accessible way to quench their sexual thirst through consuming online pornography. Another reason might be that it's not for sexual desire, it's for the desire to be deviant and to be sneaky, and they want to be bad, and they have that desire. But a third motivation is the motivation towards their peer status. And this is the idea found by Abil and colleagues that through exploring sexuality through digital media, through pornography, that they can come across as more competent, more mature. And they can also fit in. If other friends are looking at pornography on their phones and they find some pornography, they can have higher levels of peer acceptance. It can also help them to seek attention from others if they do something really alluring, like show people a really sexual picture, or they can bully others through showing pictures of other people. So it seems to involve this establishing, improving, and maintaining status in terms of their popularity hierarchy. Now, we do understand that prevalences of using pornography and the outcomes of it tend to be different on average for girls and for boys. For girls, studies have found that about 5% have sent a sext, that is, a sexually explicit instant message, either in text or in an image. And 3% have pornographic material stored on the hard drive on their phone. So it's not super popular amongst girls. That being said, the girls that engage in these behaviors tend to be considered more popular amongst the boys. So boys tend to like the girls engaging in these sexual behaviors more than the girls who don't. However, the opposite is true for their popularity amongst girls. The girls who engage in more sexually explicit activities online tend to be less popular amongst their same gender peers. And the girls who engage in this more tend to rate themselves as having a higher desire for popularity. They actually desire being popular more, showing how that peer status motivation is actually very influential. Now, comparing girls to boys, we find a lot more boys are doing these behaviors. 7% have sent a sext, that is a sexually explicit message or image, and 14% have pornographic material on their phone. Now, we find the boys that engage in these behaviors more tend to actually be more popular amongst the girls. It improves their popularity amongst other gender peers. And they also have more desire to be popular, but they also feel more peer influence. The boys who engage in this behavior tend to say they felt more pressured into doing this by their friends. So that is something to remark. So though boys do it more often, they also have an extra motivation for doing it in that they feel like they are pressured into doing it. Oddly enough, this doesn't actually influence their popularity among same-gender friends, but it feels like it's going to. And so that's just a little bit about how the digital media can influence us in terms of our social development.